Who are these people who are playing your game or engaging in your gamified site? And I don't just mean what do they look like in the game. They seem to be a bunch of orcs and elves and other strange monsters riding on war bears. What I mean is, what do you know about the players? That starts with the standard kinds of measures like demographics, age groups, and where they live and so forth, income level, all those kinds of metrics that you might want to get in any standard kind of marketing survey. And psychographics. What do you know about their behavior? What kinds of things do they like to buy? What kinds of things do they like to do? All of those are useful in understanding the players for gamification, just as they're useful in any other kind of marketing or other activity where you're trying to do something involving certain populations of people, and you need to typically segment and not try to be all things to all people because different subcommunities will have different sorts of needs. That's all the starting point. And that will be more or less feasible or normal to do based on the nature of the application. If it's a standard marketing type external gamification situation, then that kind of data may already be there. If it's one of the other categories, then maybe it's not as useful. But in any situation, you can figure out what types of people are they here, knowing that the players in this particular system are a group of your employees as opposed to a group of your customers, for example, makes a big difference. So starting point is general things that you know about your players. But the real important aspect to learn in describing your players is what motivates them. What can you say as a starting point about the different kinds of motivations that your players have? Because again, as I've said many times, gamification very directly and frequently involves motivation. So here we see a chat room log from World of Warcraft, just to illustrate some of the different kinds of things that will motivate players even in one massively multiplayer online game. And we can see it just by the different things that people are asking for here in the chat room. So this person here, the lingo may not mean anything to you if you're not a WoW player, but this person here is looking for a couple other specific skills, a fighter that does damage and a healer, for what's called an instance run. They're trying to defeat the bosses or monsters in this specific dungeon in World of Warcraft. So that's a group that's coming together to try to beat a dungeon, and they need some help. This person here is looking for what's called an enchanter, someone who has specific craft skills, because the person posting wants to improve the quality of their gear, their armor or their weapons, and they need help. They need someone who can cast spells on them, so they're using the chat room to go and find an enchanter. That's something about improving the quality of what you have on your character, which may then be useful for dungeons, or it may be useful just because they want to show off to other people or something else. And this also shows that some people are involved in the crafting system. Those enchanters have spent time and money in the game to build up skills in casting those specific kinds of spells, a different kind of activity within the game. This person here is trying to sell something for 450 gold. The game has an auction house where you can buy and sell, but this person is going and trying to do it directly, trying to make money, engaged in economic activity in the world. Again, a different kind of activity than the previous ones. And all of these different activities relate to different examples of things that people may want to accomplish. This one here is a group that's trying to get an achievement. So they're going to go through a dungeon, but the point is not really to defeat the monsters in the dungeon. The point is to get this achievement that the game has set up. If you conquer a certain dungeon in a certain way, you get a reward. You get a recognition that you hit that achievement, and so that's the objective of that group that's going on there. Lots of different things happening all within the same game, a key to why World of Warcraft is so successful, and a lesson that we can take to apply to gamification. All right, so how do you define different kinds of players in a gamified system. The most common model of player types that is discussed today in gamification is the Bartle model of player types. Richard Bartle, who I mentioned earlier as the games researcher and designer from the University of Essex, came up with this framework several decades ago when he was studying the early multi-user dungeons, the early massively multiplayer online games. And what he found was certain recurrent patterns and 4 broad types that he could bucket players into. Now, Bartle was expressly not trying to make a statement about player types in every game, and he certainly wasn't trying to make a statement about motivational types in the world in general that would extend past games. But his framework has proven to be very durable. It's a great starting place because you can find these 4 categories in pretty much any kind of situation that gamification would apply to, but take it with a grain of salt. Exactly what the borders are between these categories and exactly what the percentages are of people that fit into them is subject to a great deal of debate, and gamification applied in a particular area may involve a different set of categories of player types. For example, if it's an internal gamification system for helping people get to know each other at work, or for improving the productivity of researchers trying to piece together pieces of information, maybe these 4 categories I'm going to give you don't work. But as a starting point, it's a great way of thinking about different kinds of player types. So Bartle talked about 4 categories, a 2x2 matrix of player types. On this axis, on the one side are players, and on the other side are the world, or is the world. On this axis at the top is acting on those things, and at the bottom is interacting with those things. So players who want to act upon the world, he called achievers. These are people who want to reach some achievement, to overcome some obstacle, probably to get some recognition of their achievement, and so they want to do some action in the world that the game creates and get recognition for that achievement. Those who want to interact with the world, he called explorers. These are the people who want to see what's possible within the game. Go scope out all the territory. Go try and see if they can jump off of that mountain and not fall to their doom. Push on the limits of the game just because it's there, to quote Edmund Hillary's statement about why he climbed Mount Everest. The explorers want to try out every piece of the world that they can find, to find new vistas, to figure out new things to do with the game. Down here, people who care about players as opposed to the world but want to interact with those players, Bartle called socializers. So these are players who care particularly about interacting with others, being on teams, talking and chatting with other players of the game, being part of a community. The social experience is more important than the achievements that come out of that social experience. And finally, the most controversial category Bartle had for acting upon other players, he called these killers. And usually killers are described as people who don't just want to go out and win the game, because that's an achiever, but want to stomp on other people, to fight against other players and totally vanquish and destroy them. In Bartle's framing, killers is actually broader than that. It's anyone who wants to impose themselves on other people. So that could also be, for example, by healing other people, by feeling like you're in control of the situation and that you're the one who's keeping the whole group alive. That would also fit in this category. But basically, Bartle talked about killers as a small but important part of the system. Most people are not killers most of the time. Some estimates are that it's 1% of the population, but they are often the most intense and aggressive participants. They're the ones who really care about the game because they will go to any length to vanquish their opponents, to be the top dogs in charge of whatever they're trying to do. So 4 different categories that Bartle defined. You can think about how those would apply to any kind of situation that might be gamified. Important caveat. This does not mean that we are all born in one of these quadrants, that people are always explorers or always socializers. Pretty much all of us are in every one of these quadrants at some time or another for some situation or another. And we typically will go back and forth between different kinds of activities. So thinking about player types doesn't mean segmenting your players once and for all. It means, first of all, understanding what are the different niches that your players can go into, and then understanding how your players at a specific time in the game might respond to one or more of these kinds of structures.